Welcome back to another episode of The Pipeline. Thrilled to have some awesome guests and some new folks from Monad Labs joining us today. We have Georgios and Jason working on Axelar. We are also joined by Eunice, Monad's COO, and Joey Anthony, Monad's BD Lead. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to see a lot of you again virtually. Just a quick background on myself and Axelar. I'm Georgios, one of the two founders of the Axelar network. My other co-founder, Sergey, could not be here today. We both met back in the day when we were students at MIT. And while at MIT, we were both part of the founding team of the Algorand blockchain, one of the blockchains that were trying to be faster than Ethereum at the time, and very similar problems, very similar engineering problems to what Eunice, Keon, and the rest of the team are trying to tackle with Monad. I guess on the personal side, I first was inspired to get into the space when, the whole idea of Bitcoin was pitched to me when I was at MIT. I'm personally from Greece, and as many of you may remember, we had this massive financial crisis, right, a few years ago, and it was almost impossible to even send remittances to my family. My friends could not get their money out of the banks back in Greece. So really the notion of a censorship-resistant financial system where anyone can just seamlessly transact from their cell phone, anyone in the world, where really everyone has cell phones, but not everyone has bank accounts, it really resonated with me. And of course, the technology as well is fascinating. So I decided to jump into the space. At Algorand, I worked with Sergey and Silvio, the founder. Initially, it was a 3-person team, very technical team out of MIT. I personally designed the consensus protocol for the Algorand blockchain. Sergey has done a lot of foundational work in cryptography. For example, Sergey is the person who led the standardization of BLS signatures, which is the core signature scheme now, securing Ethereum 2.0. That's what validators use to vote. And all in all, I think we've had something like 7 years of working together and building secure infrastructure in the space. And today, we are also joined by Jason. He's been with us from, I think, almost the start of our journey, and he's our head of DeFi, working with a lot of the partners. So, pleasure to have him as well on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, it's super great to have you all here. Certainly some great MIT representation on this call. And I think there's certainly a lot of great MIT representation across crypto as a whole. Do you mind giving a little intro for anyone who hasn't had their finger on the pulse for the past few months? What is Axelar? What's that quick product rundown?
Absolutely. So we'll keep it simple, but feel free to jump in with any questions. Let me quickly present my screen. I find it's helpful to have a visual when presenting. So Axelar at its core is an interoperability network, and it's structured as a blockchain connecting all the different blockchains. Today, 56 blockchains and counting. In terms of interoperability, if we look a few years back when we were starting Axelar, I remember there were a bunch of centralized bridges, REN protocol being one, multi-chain being another one, which recently lost all of its funds. And it was very clear from the time that bridges were not going to scale. There were centralized entities, usually some founder or some other centralized entity would hold all of the funds in some key. Once that key was compromised, which was just a matter of time, all of the funds would get lost. And this is really what happened with the biggest hacks in the DeFi space over the last 2 years. The Harmony hack, the Ronin hack, multi-chain, all happened because of centralization. And so with Axelar, we decided to take a very different approach to solving the cross-chain problem. Axelar itself is not a bridge. It solves the bridging problem, but it's actually not a bridge. It is a messaging platform on top of which you can build applications. Right? Some of the applications may be cross-chain DEXs, cross-chain money markets, cross-chain NFT marketplaces. Similarly to how you can build any application on Ethereum or Monad, with Axelar, you can build similar types of applications, but spanning all of the different blockchains. And you may be familiar, of course, with some of the competitors of Axelar, like Wormhole, Chainlink CCIP, Layer 0. These are all message passing platforms on top of which you can build applications. The two key differentiators of Axelar are, there's two of them. The first one is the architecture itself. Axelar, because we have a blockchain, we can offer many-to-many connectivity. So when you see all of the blockchains in the circle around Axelar, we can create a one-off connection to the Axelar blockchain, and through Axelar, route messages to any of the other blockchains we can connect to. Through a single point of connection, you can connect to everything. In other words, many-to-many connectivity. Virtually all of the other competitors I mentioned, they offer only pairwise connectivity, which makes it significantly harder to add new chains. And often when they add new chains, they only connect to a subset of the chains instead of all of them. So this is what this architecture of being a blockchain connected blockchains helps with. The second aspect is, of course, security. With Axelar, because we designed it as a blockchain based on the Cosmos SDK, it has a fully decentralized validator set. As I'm scrolling down, you can probably see a lot of the validator names you are familiar with from the Ethereum mainnet. We have 75 validators, and in order to, from a theoretical perspective, attack the network and steal funds, you would need to corrupt a majority of those validators. From that point of view, because Axelar has all of the biggest validators from the biggest chains in the space, Axelar is almost as secure as all of the chains that it connects to. I guess that's the key two differentiators. One is scalability, many-to-many connectivity, much easier to add new chains. And the second one is the decentralization. And as far as I know, I think Axelar is 5 times more decentralized than all of the competitors. I think Wormhole has 19 validators, Axelar has 75, and then everyone else has only a handful of them, right? So the decentralization is a really important feature, and it does a lot for security.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that overview and agree. I think that those key characteristics are really what do differentiate and make Axelar's stand out amongst its competitors. Beyond kind of like the core differentiators itself, what was kind of the impetus or inspiration that led to Axelar's design and kind of that origin story? Obviously, given your guys' background as being OGs in the space, definitely a lot strong connections there, but love to hear it straight from you.
Yeah, I love this question because our inspiration is exactly the reason why we want to work with Monad and why we're excited about this. Because when we launched Algorand back in the day, I think it was late 2019, it became evident how hard it is to onboard users and developers to the blockchain. Of course, part of that was because there was a new virtual machine and everyone wanted to build on the EVM at the time, which is something you are solving. But the second piece was that there was no easy way to onboard users to the chain. All of the liquidity at the time was on Ethereum. You have MetaMask. How do you even bridge over to Algorand, right? So we started thinking about the bridging infrastructure, right? We thought bridging by itself, simple bridging, is going to be necessary. And then as we spend more time, diving deeply into what needs to be built, what developer services, what user experiences, we realized bridging is more than just asset transfers. It's much more about user experience and abstracting away all the complexities of Web3 today. So instead of building a simple bridge, we decided to design a more generalizable platform where you can pass messages, and bridges like Squid, others like Casimir, Interswap, dozens of different teams are building bridges today on Axelar. All those can develop their technology on top of robust infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it was to allow developers like yourselves that are building those amazing high throughput blockchains to be able to onboard users easily.
Actually, speaking of which, like for onboarding users, I'm curious about, let's say like I'm a developer using the general message platform protocol. Sorry, what was it?
General message passing.
Thank you.
You got the initial, so.
General message passing. So as a dev who's using GMP, what exactly would I need to do to include a new chain that Axelar has recently decided to integrate with? Would I need to write new lines of code? Would I be able to get that connectivity out of the box? How easy is it for a dev?
That's a great question with no simple answer. So maybe let me try to make it a little bit more specific, right? And I think that's something that could be interesting for a lot of developers building on Monad, because they will not want to redeploy on 100 different chains, right? They will want to have the brain of their application on a fast EVM chain, and then they will want to allow users from other networks to easily interact with their application, right? So maybe the architecture we should focus on is one where you have the hub of your application on Monad, and then other people want to just do simple deposits from other chains, right? Let's say of a perp DEX built on Monad, and people want to open a position from Arbitrum, from Solana, from anywhere else. So in that example, a developer would effectively have to deploy a small piece of code on any other chain they want, say Arbitrum, and they would effectively just connect that piece of code with the endpoint that we have on the Arbitrum chain. And through that endpoint, they could be able to pass a message to the brain of the application on Monad itself. Once the message gets there, the application can decide how it wants to parse the message. So effectively, on the origin chain, the developer would write, okay, I want to deposit X amount of USDC. The endpoint contract would accept a USDC deposit, and the brain of the application would parse it as, okay, I take this deposit and I open a position. And in doing so, you would actually be able to allow users from Arbitrum to directly interact with your application. So there would be no bridging step in between, because together with the lock-in of the USDC on the origin chain, you would also pass the message that tells the application what to do. And to get started, to send your first message through Axelar, this is very simple, right? You can go to our documentation. It's really easy, right? It's just an endpoint you connect to. You can get started and send your first message within 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great that you can abstract away a lot of the application logic away from the connectivity pieces itself. So very like plug and play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also solves for a lot of the fragmentation, right? Because as we've seen with applications like Sushi or Aave, usually you launch them on many different places. But if you launch all of your logic on one place, there's no fragmentation at all, right? You bring all of the users to Monad, which is good for your ecosystem, and it's also a much simpler development paradigm for all of the developers, right? So if I have to make one prediction, I guess, over the next 2 years, I think most of the cross-chain applications will be deployed using that architecture.
Yeah, and zooming out on this a little bit, certainly cross-chain has been a big conversation across all of crypto, and a rather divisive conversation looking at the past few couple of years. Would love to hear some of the use cases that you're most excited about and that you're building towards here.
I think Jason would be great to answer that question. He's been working directly with a lot of the builders, and we also had, I guess, a massive announcement by the Lido community last week. Right, there was this vote. So, Jason, maybe you want to talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Georgios and I were actually just talking about this earlier, how there isn't as many pure message passing use cases. A lot of what we see today and associated with like cross-chain or interoperability is still like mostly focused on asset transfers. I think that's just to like a testament to how early we are still in when it comes to interoperability and cross-chain. And there's some fundamental reasons that's like restricting that, right? For example, today cross-chain gas fees are still quite high because as a user you have to pay for gas on the source chain, gas on the destination chain, as well as a little bit of a relay gas cost, right? And even for L2s, that's still incredibly prohibitive. These transactions, range for a few dollars to maybe even like close to $10. But as we see additional scaling solutions that lower down gas costs and chains like Monad, there's going to be more cross-chain transactions simply because it's just more cheaper and more accessible. I think the second thing to keep in mind, right, is every time there's a new chain that launches like Monad, it's not just like a linear increase in the number of cross-chain transactions or messages passed, right? It's going to scale exponentially as we see, there to be like thousands of chains. It's already to the point where we're seeing like a new chain, whether it's a rollup, an app chain, a Cosmos chain, whatever, being launched, every single day. So if you kind of extrapolate where the industry is going, it's almost inevitable that cross-chain will only grow in size. And, in terms of use cases, I think then what we see today on a single chain, there will be a cross-chain version of that. So I think there'll be, in terms of use cases, everything we see today on a single chain, there'll be a cross-chain version of it. And on top of that, there'll be like new unique use cases that we haven't really even thought of yet. But for now, I think the most exciting things we're seeing are different types of asset transfers, right? Whether that's like bridging, cross-chain swaps, very similar to how the first protocols that launched on single chain were like DEXs, and then you have different designs and different architectures of DEXs. We're seeing the same right now when it comes to cross-chain swaps.
So building off a little bit of what you were saying there, Jason, I think we've seen how builders and users treat interoperability evolve over time. I'm curious to hear, maybe speaking specifically to that arc of like how that evolution is improved over time and how you see that changing more in the future, and kind of where the direction goes, is given that you guys are kind of at the center of it all and probably putting the most thought into it of anyone in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, like even a year ago, right, when we're speaking to teams, they were saying, oh, we're happy being on one chain. They don't really see enough of a value proposition to launch on other chains. Now the conversation with these teams are drastically different. Like the conversation immediately is, we're launching on 2 or 3 chains with plans to go to X, Y, and Z. And it's quite natural, right? It's just, if you look at the space, a year ago, there was maybe like 2 or 3 chains that had liquidity, has users. Now nobody can really definitively say where are the most liquidity, where are the most users. And frankly, it's shifting so quickly that you have to be planning to build in a cross-chain world, right? And as I mentioned earlier, the more accessible and the more friendly the developer experience is from interoperability solutions like Axelar, the more this effect is only going to be magnified. So, one of the things we're really excited about Monad is, I think what you guys are building ties hand in hand with Axelar. Not only the EVM compatibility piece, but instant finality is actually crucial for building cross-chain applications. Because today, one of the limiting factors of some of these cross-chain message passing use cases is that nobody wants to wait like 20 minutes for a command to be passed, right? And unfortunately, with Ethereum, there's a lot of block verification. So, for us, it takes anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes. And then if it's an L2, we wait for the full blocks on Ethereum as well. It takes even longer. But when you're building like these message passing use cases on chains with instant finality, such as Monad, the messages are much faster, right? It could be anywhere between like 60 to 90 seconds. So the user experience is substantially better. And we actually think, this is the kind of world where there will be more and more cross-chain applications. Georgios, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And I think you touched on a couple of key pain points, one of which I'd love to double click on a little bit more there. I think for anyone that's existed in the DeFi space for a little bit now and have tried using that, especially as they go across chain, one of the big issues that you get is kind of the liquidity fragmentation, for example, across multiple stablecoins or across multiple assets. And then you're also dealing with that maybe it's siloed in one chain and they're having to wrap. I know one of the products you guys that I'd love to hear a little bit more is how you see it stitching into the future world of interoperability is Axelar's interchain token service. Would love to get a little bit more color on kind of like that product and seeing how you see it stitching into kind of the future of where things are headed.
Yeah, I'm really personally very excited about the interchain token service. It's still currently only in beta, but the feedback we've received so far from some early developers has just been pretty like overwhelming, right? Because it's really the first code-free, permissionless tokenization and bridging solution all built into one. Speaking for myself, the amount of times I wanted to like launch a token or try a meme coin, but was like restricted just because I don't know how to write a single line of code. After using the like interchain token service was absolutely like liberating and a game changer. So I do think it's something that's completely going to change the space, right? Whether it's someone who wants to like launch a meme coin or a project that just wants to be able to launch a token on multiple chains right from day one, but still knowing that they can scale to any chain down the line as long as Axelar supports it, is like a very powerful proposition. I can even anecdotally give something else. Like, for example, projects that are super well known, such as like Frax, right? As you probably know, they have their own native bridge called Frax Ferry, where they use to expand Frax assets to a few of the native chains, right? And we now have this exclusive partnership with Frax, where we are helping them issue all Frax assets on any of the chains that Frax Ferry doesn't support and all the future chains as well. And where Sam and the team is coming from this is they realize just how fast cross-chain is evolving, right? They've realized and agree with us that the world is going to be thousands of chains, and the key focus of Frax shouldn't be worrying about like bridging or like issuing assets on other chains. That's really like Axelar's strength. So they're relying on us for that moving forward. But I really think this is just like an example of where we're headed as an industry. I think very soon people won't like launching a token on a single chain will become quite meaningless. You have to be able to launch a token that's cross-chain from day one with the best security and something that you can trust and easily access. And that's what really the interchain token service brings, right? From meme coins to real assets issued by BlackRock, I think everyone can benefit from this.
And just to add here, the interchain token service, in my opinion, in my biased opinion, is really the first service, the first cross-chain service that fully aligns with the ethos of the space, being fully permissionless, anonymous, and decentralized. Like with ITS, literally anyone, you don't have to be a developer. You can go to a front end, you can take 2 minutes to take your token cross-chain. And that's why we saw that the first use cases that gained popularity with ITS, which by the way, it hasn't really been fully announced, right? It's still in beta. People found it and they launched a couple of successful stable meme coins around it, right? So this is really the power of decentralization and being permissionless. And it's been really well received, and we're looking forward to doubling down, building more features around it so that, not only anonymous teams, but also some of the enterprises, the financial institutions as well, real-world asset tokenization services can fully leverage the power of this new technology.
Yeah, we kind of started to discuss this as well, the concept of bridging. And I know Axelar, of course, is not a bridge, but bridging being obviously a very essential component of any new blockchain's launch strategy, or at least cross-chain interoperability to access liquidity and various other needs from day one. How does Axelar mitigate the risk around interoperability?
That's a great question. So just to level set a little bit, right? I know in the space, there's been a lot of debate around native assets versus wrapped assets and how one is more secure than the other. I think in reality, you are as secure as the bridging infrastructure that you have connecting the various instances of your assets, right? So if you have a native asset deployed across 10 different chains, but you use insecure bridging infrastructure, a loss could be as catastrophic for that native asset as if you had a regular wrapped asset. So no matter how you deploy your assets, whether it's like a regular bridge wrapped asset or a native asset that is connected across the different instances, you need to have good security practices and strong contingency mechanisms so that even if this 1% that you don't expect to go wrong goes wrong, you can still minimize the damage. So with Axelar, a few different things. Number one is decentralization, right? This is the first, I think we're the first decentralized network and the only one, as far as I know, today that can secure assets across different chains. This gets rid of the most common attack vector, which again stole $2 billion in funds over the last 2 years. So as we talked about, that's super important. Another one that's often, I guess, I don't see it talked about as much is rate limiting, right? Rate limiting is a very simple piece of code you can add as a check at the end of every transaction to minimize the impact of a hack, right? Even if the rest of the code base completely breaks, but you have a rate limit, you're going to be able to minimize the damage. And actually what's cool with Axelar's architecture, this many-to-many connectivity with a blockchain in the middle, is that you can also have customizable rate limits on the Axelar blockchain itself. So even if some other blockchain, one of the many that we connect, itself breaks, as long as Axelar works as expected, then any damage should be contained to that chain. And again, if Axelar itself breaks, as long as you have rate limits, maybe you won't be able to contain damage within each individual chain, but the rate limits should work quite well as well, right? So it's multiple different layers of security that work together to minimize damage. And if you want to be really, really secure, which is not something we'd recommend for every application because there's user experience trade-offs, you could use what Lido did, or Lido what just announced last week. Right? There was this vote where they looked at the different providers and solutions, and the community decided to work jointly with Axelar and Wormhole as well, Wormhole being the second most decentralized cross-chain solution in the space. And they will require approval from both solutions before an asset is minted, right? So Lido effectively uses the traditional approach of a wrapped asset being minted on different chains like BNB that don't have a native bridge, and they're going to require approval both from the Axelar validator set and the Wormhole validator set, right? And there you have two fully independent implementations. You can have stack rate limits on top. So it's really like three different layers of security, and it's going to be, I think, the most secure thing we've seen in terms of cross-chain security so far.
Yeah, that's great context for sure. I think, Eunice, do you have a follow-up there?
Yeah, just a quick one. So when it comes to like rate limiting, definitely agree that it could prevent a couple of pretty malicious activity, including like, potential DDoS attacks. What about the juxtaposition against, high performance blockchains and many chains that are coming to market that are quoting, including Monad, very high possibilities of, throughput?
I think what we've seen, at least historically, is that even the super high throughput on Monad itself, like let's say $10 billion changing hands or $100 billion changing hands every second, the cross-chain volume rarely hits those numbers, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I think you make a great point, right? As an absolute number, an absolute rate limit may not make sense for some large assets, but you can still cap the amount of damage to a small, a very small fraction of the total funds that you would otherwise have at risk. And again, the rate limit itself, it can be, hourly, it can be over 6 hours, as we have seen being said for many assets on top of Axelar. But I can also imagine in the future you have some kind of committee that tracks how money moves back and forth, and you can refresh the rate limit every 20, 30 minutes as well. Under different conditions, right? So definitely not perfect, definitely not absolute numbers in terms of rate limits, but I think no matter what, it's still a great mechanism to really minimize the damage compared to the full TVL of the different assets.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess like using live data as a good heuristic for how to actually select what a rate limit could and should look like.
Definitely. Security is obviously such an important component for Monad, of course. And as we open this environment up to new users, that's really the top priority for us. Want to call some attention to the release of this podcast, which is going to happen on announcement day regarding Axelar's collaboration with Monad. And we saw Axelar's public commitment for support on Monad from a really early stage relative to blockchain maturity. So curious to hear from your perspective, why is the team excited about Monad and what ultimately led to this early commitment?
So I believe, Eunice, we first talked with you and Keon, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? I think it was definitely a year ago at the very least.
I think it was almost 2 years ago. It was like spring, maybe May 2022 or something like that. It's definitely been some time, but obviously a lot of progress has been made on both sides.
Wow, time flies. Yeah, and we have a common investor, right? I believe Dragonfly is an investor in Monad, and they made the introduction at the time. And usually when you talk to technical founders, being a technical founder myself, it's really easy to tell, right? Who is legit and who is not. So I remember having a really deep conversation at the time about scalability and a lot of the other issues you are solving. And I think we also had the MIT connection. I remember talking about that. So usually, right? It's, the blockchain itself, I think the soul of a blockchain itself is the community, but the community depends on the founders and everything they build to the table, right? Of course, now Monad is one of the most decentralized and degen communities in the space, but you need to have the right guidance. So I think from the very early days, it was clear you were going to do all the right things. And yeah, frankly, I think you've exceeded everyone's expectations. So it's incredible what you've built. Because of all the, I guess, all of the excitement we see, the community excitement, the demand from different builders, maybe Jason can add a little bit about how many of the partners he's talking to ask us when we're going to launch on Monad. I think it's became pretty evident that we need to be there as soon as possible, ideally day one, right? Because for an interoperability platform, really the way to capture developers is you want to help them be available on new chains, then capture new opportunities. A lot of these are like new companies, and they want to be first on new interesting ecosystems like Monad, right? So the technology, the community excited, and the trust we have on your team all contribute to us wanting to be there as soon as day one.
So Axelar has been around for 4 years now, and the state in which the ecosystem was in 4 years ago to now is just absolutely night and day, and certainly a very futuristic state from that perspective of 4 years ago. If we look into the next 4 years, are there any cutting edge future state pie in the sky use cases, or maybe states of interoperability that you see down the road that you're particularly aspirational about or hopeful for?
I love this question. It's something we get quite a bit, and I think the answer is a bit contrarian, and it's there's no killer use cases of interoperability, right? Interoperability is about user experience, about making Web3 usable as easy to use as Web2. And to get there, we need to integrate with virtually every application in the space. Right? You can be doing DeFi, gaming, real-world asset tokenization, NFTs. It doesn't really matter. Right? Interoperability is about enabling users to only have to think about assets and applications, and abstracting away completely on the back end, the different blockchains. Maybe your asset is on Solana, the application is on Arbitrum. Should the user even know that this is the case? Probably not. The wallet itself should pick the asset, add the total balance of USDC across different chains, present one unified balance to the user, and then use Axelar to pass messages across different networks, use the interoperability infrastructure to fully abstract away all of the complexities, right? So in terms of where we see interoperability going, we believe it's going to be part of every single use case. And it's something we're starting to see already, right? If you look at who we work with on all of the big verticals, like real-world asset tokenization, teams like Ondo and Centrifuge and the Mountain Protocol. In DeFi, there's like, Uniswap, DYDX, Frax, Lido. Gaming, there's Immutable, with who we also announced the canonical bridge integration last week. Projects like Decentraland. So these are all teams that are using, highly leveraging the Axelar stack, right? And they're all going to need interoperability in the long run. Jason, don't know if you want to add anything else, but if I have to make one guess, interoperability is going to be everywhere in 4 years.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Georgios. The only thing I will add, though, is, as we kind of talked about earlier, only Axelar is set up in a way where we can add on this programmable interoperability layer. So because of the Axelar virtual machine, we're very bullish that Axelar is going to be, in the best position to support this world where interoperability is everywhere.
Well, we are all super excited for that. I certainly can't wait. Really excited to unveil this collaboration between Axelar and Monad. Before we wrap up here, we've been taking shamelessly a rip from Ledger and Kobe's playbook on Up Only, which is the gold standard of podcasts in crypto. And we've been asking a question called Final Alpha. And it doesn't have to be crypto related. It can be very high level. But whatever you would like to share with the Axelar community, with the Monad community, with whoever is listening in, some piece of advice or alpha, we would love to hear it.
I'd love to say a certain piece of advice, but I think our legal is watching right now. So please give me a moment to think. Maybe I'll let Jason go first.
I mean, now I'm worried about legal as well. But if I were to say, I think in crypto, everyone's saying you got to follow the narrative, right? Narrative changes very quickly. It's very much attention based. But I am in the belief that that's true in the short, maybe even medium term. But in the long term, it's really about like good technology and very strong community. And for me, that's really what Monad is, why it's so special, because Monad really has both. And I feel like very few protocols are like that out there. So advice is, ignore the noise if you're in it for the long run, and look for projects with amazing tech and a very a strong community.
Yeah, thanks for the support, Jason. I don't think there's anything to add to that.
Well, that is truly alpha indeed. I'll open it up if Eunice or Joey, if you want to add in some spontaneous alpha, totally open to it. If not, we'll cut this part and leave the listeners wondering.
So Jason, you had mentioned something specifically about, you hear a lot about chasing the narrative, but I think there's a lot to be said of teams and founders who are so convicted in what they are building, sticking with the origin story of like why a project is doing what they're doing. And I see a lot of that in the mission behind Axelar. So props to you guys and what you guys are building.
And maybe just to build off this, and none of this has been, nor is what I'm going to say financial advice, but conviction in founders, I think, is something really critical for the success of projects and where things are headed. But also, as you kind of evaluate where you put your time and focus, maintaining your own convictions, as especially we head into future bull markets as things come up down the road, is just as critical. And making sure that we don't get lost in kind of the noise and everything going on as all the hype starts to build up is definitely a key part of keeping the focus and making sure that we're all building in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Georgios and Jason. Hopefully I'm getting a little bit better at the pronunciation of your name there, Georgios, as this episode has progressed. I feel like I'm butchering it every time with my awful American accent, but thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for joining this episode of The Pipeline. Really excited to share this collaboration with both communities, and really grateful to have had Joey and Eunice joining us as well on The Pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having us.